Well, it's been quite a shock to, I think, our whole community, what has transpired. I know it was for me. In fact, yesterday I got an early start on working on my sermon, and I kind of went off to a little cafe a ways away and worked on my sermon and got it done early and couldn't believe it because that normally never happens for me. It was all finished and ready to go probably by 9:30, 10 o'clock yesterday morning. And I'm driving home westbound on Ina Road, and before I get to Oracle, suddenly traffic just backs up and Ina Road turned into a parking lot. And at that point, I didn't know what was going on, and suddenly there are police cars everywhere. I got a text from someone right about that moment and said that there was some sort of shooting that just happened right there. And I was stuck, couldn't get out, tried to get out a little side road right behind it there, and that turned into a parking lot. And so I literally, not knowing what was going on, just walked over near that area, and there was a woman there that was near there when the whole thing went down. Nowhere close to where there was any shooting, but in the shopping center area there. And I just asked her what happened. And I got to tell you, not if you gave me 1,000 guesses and 1,000 years, I could have never guessed what came out of her mouth. It was such a shock when she said Gabrielle Giffords has just been shot in the head, and multiple other people have been shot. And it's such a violation to everyone in this community. We're all hit by this. And of course, as Jack said, it doesn't matter your politics on this, right? She was the congresswoman for all of us in this community. And there's a part of you that just, you don't know for sure what to do with this in these moments. And it's going to touch all of us in this community in varying degrees. For some of us, it's going to be a little bit further away, but we're going to feel it in our community as it unfolds this next week. And for others of you, it's hitting very close to home. In fact, right before the second service started, I didn't even know this, but one of our elders is friends with one of the people that were murdered yesterday. And he said after church, we're headed to the hospital where his wife has been shot in both legs, and we're going to spend some time with her. And I just... that family's never going to be the same. And we have an elder here who's touched by this. And before this service started, I had some of you that are in the medical field that have been directly involved in this. And it's hard on you. It's troubling. And there's a part of us that says, this is not the way it's supposed to be. It's not. Something's gone wrong here. It's not supposed to be this way, right? Congressmen and women should be able to meet with their constituency without fear of being assassinated. 9-year-old girls should be able to have a front row view of the political process in this country and not lose their lives. And judges should be safe in their neighborhoods, and shoppers should be able to go to the grocery store without fear like this. But we live in this strange reality that the truth of the way things are currently is not the way it's supposed to be. And so what do you do when the truth of your current reality is not the way it's supposed to be at a very deep level? See, that is what our community is going to wrestle with. And part of the questions that come up in all of this is, where was God? Where was God? And why didn't God intervene? There was a moment, right? There was maybe multiple moments where God could have stepped in and intervened in some way. And we're left with the question, why didn't he? Because we're troubled by that. And the truth is, I don't have a good answer for that. I have some theological answers. I have some answers that I believe are theologically correct. But you know what? As I've processed this in the last 12 hours, they fall very flat in my own heart and in my own mind. The last 12 hours, processing this just as the news was going along, that meeting with the worship team and all of us just kind of coming together and saying, God, what do you want? What somehow we knew this morning needed to be different, and we didn't know to what degree, and as news was coming out. And I found myself wrestling with those questions as we're trying to pull all of this together. God, in that critical moment, Why didn't you intervene? And I realized my theological answers to that I believe are correct. They don't get at it. Because here's the issue. My heart is asking a question, and there's not a sound theological answer that answers what my heart is feeling in this moment. See? There was a moment in the life of Christ where he was asked a very similar question. In fact, if you want, if you brought your Bibles, you can turn to the Gospel of John. In the Gospel of John, the 11th chapter, is the story of Lazarus, as Ashley was talking about earlier. And of course, Mary and Martha, his sisters, realize he is gravely ill. This is life-threatening. And so they send word. They send word to Christ, who is in a nearby city. You've got to come. You've got to come because your friend Lazarus is gravely ill. And you realize there's this moment where they needed Christ to intervene, and they had reason for great hope. They had watched Christ work miracles. They had seen him bring people back from the brink of death. They had seen him heal people that were crippled. They had seen him work miracles. And it's just this thought that if in this moment, there's this immediate moment that if Christ would intervene here, it will be okay. And they call on the one they follow. They call on the Son of God. And Jesus does a very peculiar and in some ways disturbing thing, doesn't he? He doesn't come. He doesn't come. In fact, Scripture says he waits until Lazarus is dead. In fact, Lazarus has been dead for 4 days when Jesus arrives on the scene. And people are hurting, especially two sisters. And so we pick up the story here, and there's two encounters that Christ has with Martha and then with Mary. And I want to talk about his encounter with Mary first, and then come back to his encounter with Martha. But I want you to feel the question that Mary asks here. It says, verse 32, chapter 11, verse 32. When Mary reached the place where Jesus saw him, she fell to his feet. Do you feel the anguish? There's a moment. It's just, I can't believe this has happened. She falls at his feet and said, Lord, and here's the question she's really asking, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. And the question is, why weren't you? If you would have been here, there was this moment in time when you were needed and you weren't here. Why? Why did you not intervene in this moment? And I suppose Jesus had some very good theological answers he could have given there. Theological answers much more profound and much more accurate, far greater than any answer I could give at a theological level, right? He could have answered her question in the scope of all eternity. But he doesn't. In that moment, Jesus doesn't answer the question, why weren't you here? Because maybe, here's what I want to pose to you. Maybe that question isn't what we need most. Maybe there's a deeper question. So Jesus responds, but I want you to catch this. He doesn't answer her question. Because maybe that's not the question we need answered the most in this moment. Sure feels like it. And man, my heart goes out to every one of you that have been touched by this deeply. And my heart goes out to our whole community on this. But I want you to see how Christ responds. Look at verse 33. When Jesus saw her weeping, man, the anguish. When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come along with her also weeping, catch this, he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. And here's the first thing I want you to understand in this passage here. Jesus sees them hurting over this, and what is his heart? What do I need to know first here in all of this? The first thing is that Jesus is hurting over this. There is a family of a 9-year-old girl, and they are hurting beyond belief. And you know what I know? That Christ is hurting with them. He feels their pain and their anguish. There are families in this that are in their worst nightmare. There is a community that is hurting all this. And Christ feels our pain. But more than that, look at what goes on here. It says, he says, "Where have you laid him?" he asked. "Come and see, Lord," they replied. And Jesus wept. Then the Jews said, "See how he loved him." Jesus loved Lazarus. He loved the one that was lost. And there are 6 people who lost their lives. And regardless of what their lives were, regardless of what they did or did not accomplish, regardless of their spiritual standing, they were loved by Christ. Because he loves the world. And the first thing we have to understand is that Christ is responding from his heart. He's hurting for those that hurt, and he loves those that were hurt. And that's where we start in this. Now, I want you to think about a different question in all of this. And this gets back to what the encounter that Christ has with Mary. With Martha, which actually took place before the encounter with Mary. But I want to hit it secondly here. Look with me back up to verse 21. And now we have the encounter between Jesus and Martha. It says this. Verse 21, "Lord," Martha said to Jesus, "if you had been here, my brother would not have died." Right? And she goes on, she says, "I know you can do all things. I know you can do incredible things." But she doesn't have in her wildest dreams what God really can do in this moment and just how powerful he is. But again, she asks this question, "Why weren't you here? Had you been here, had you had come at the right moment, and you knew the moment, how could you have missed this moment?" That's the question we ask. How could you not have intervened, God? There could have been multiple places that you could have intervened, God, to have prevented the tragedy that happened yesterday at about this time. That's the question. But Jesus answers a different question. And here's the question that I think he's answering. Okay, and then we'll read his response. I think the question we most desperately need to ask and have answered is, where do I turn when tragedy strikes? Where do I put my hope when the truth of the life I'm living in is not the way it's supposed to be? Where do I turn? Where do I find hope in that moment? That's the question, friends, I think Jesus answers in this moment. Look with me at verse 25. Here's how Jesus responds. Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me will, even though he dies, and whoever lives and believes in me will never die. And it's what he's saying here in this moment is he's saying, I'm the resurrection and the life. I'm the one, Martha, I'm the one who stands over death. I'm the resurrection. And what he's saying is the place you need to turn, I know you don't understand it. And you know what, Martha? I could give you theological answers that explain this in the realm of eternity. But the truth is, friends, our view can never fully grasp a view of all eternity. It still strikes at our heart that this tragedy is not the way it's supposed to be. And to try and explain it as anything else falls flat on our hearts and in our souls. But what we need in that moment is to say, where do I turn? How do I live through this with hope and peace and love? And Christ says, turn to me. And you know why you turn to me? Because when there's death, I am the resurrection and life. I am the one that stands over death. That's where we turn, friends. And I love what he says here in those moments. Look back at this verse. He says, he who believes in me will live even though he dies. And Christ is, this statement of those who believe in me, even though they die, they will live. It is this statement of trust and faith in Christ. He's saying, turn to me, believe in me. And it's this idea, and I want to communicate it just briefly with this illustration of the stool. It's this idea that what are you going to trust in? What are you going to rest your life in? And to become a follower of Christ, that's what he's pointing here in this moment. He's saying, you trust in me. Don't rest in your own strength of your own legs. Don't put your trust in anything else. You put the weight of your life on me. And he doesn't give Martha an answer for why it's all going to be okay. What he says is, just turn to me. And that's what I want to encourage all of you in. In fact, I would imagine there is maybe a number of you here this morning, and you've never taken that very profound step of saying, God, I trust in you. I turn to you in the good, in the bad, in the tragedy, in the confusion, whatever it is. I'm going to trust in you that you can do a work in me, that even though I die, I will live. And if you're here this morning and you want to know how to do that or want to take that step, I want to encourage you. Before you leave here this morning, you find me or you find one of our pastors over in the prayer ministry room over there and ask us. Because what Christ is pointing to here is, in the face of great tragedy, there is one place worthy of turning over our lives in trust that will take us through it, even though we can't see how. And that is not in a good answer. It is in a person. And that person is Jesus Christ. And so I encourage you to do that. And I encourage all of us who are believers in this as we process this, is that in our own despair or our own hurt in this, that we turn back to Christ. And as we seek to encourage people around us through this tragedy, it's not about coming up with theologically correct answers for the why in this. We're to be the light of the world, and we're to point them to the truth of who Jesus is as the person we turn to when we face tragedies like this. In a few moments, we're going to have the Lord's Supper. In fact, I'm going to invite all of our ushers who are going to be serving the Lord's Supper. If you want to go back and get the elements, you can. You know, it's interesting, with Christ's life, communion becomes such a great picture of the work that he did. And if you just take the bread, for example, you know, the bread in the Last Supper, Christ takes the bread, he blesses the bread, he breaks the bread, and then he gives the bread. And those four things, in so many ways, point to the work that Christ did in this world. That it's as if the Father took Christ and put him on this earth in the form of a man. And then he blessed him. Remember, there's this moment where the Father in heaven blesses his Son, Jesus Christ, says, "This is my Son in whom I am well pleased." He has a mission in this world. But then Christ's body was broken for you and me. But in being broken, his death on the cross came as a gift that was given to you and to me. And so I want you to think about that here this morning when I ask the ushers to go ahead and begin passing the bread. That as they pass the bread, the one we turn to is the one that was taken, the one that was blessed, the one that was broken for you, and then given